Hey there friends! Today I want to talk to you about putting together a seed starting calendar. Putting together a seed starting calendar is actually pretty important in my opinion to make sure that we're sticking to the time frames when we need to be starting everything. You know, different seeds need started at different times, and in order for them to be the most successful they need to be started right on time. And two common pitfalls that new gardeners fall into is they get ahead of themselves and either plant a little too early, or time gets away from us and sometimes we end up a little bit behind without realizing it. So making sure that we're planting everything on time is really important to the success of our gardens in general. So that's why I want to help explain how it is that I put together my seed starting calendar, and then if maybe you could find that helpful and maybe try and do something very similar, just stick with it and making sure that we're going to have a successful time with our gardens. So anyway, the first thing we're going to want to do when we're putting together a seed starting calendar is separate our seeds. Basically take all of your seeds, and separate them out into the different categories. And this is helpful because later on when we're actually going to use them, having them all in the same category, we know it's time to start these ones here, these ones at this time, and so on. That way we're not, scrambling through everything and then something gets lost and forgotten or whatever. So make sure you're separating all of your seeds out. And seeds fall into two main categories. There's the ones that we directly sow into the ground, and then there's the other ones that we usually start indoors. And some kind of fall into both categories, and I hope this doesn't become too confusing, but let's just focus on the category of the ones that we're going to be directly seeding into the ground first. Even within that category, there's two subcategories. There's the ones that we're going to start later on, those are the warm weather crops, and the ones that will start a little earlier because they're cool weather crops. The ones that are the warm weather crops, this isn't going to be an exhaustive list by any means, but I do plant most of the most common things, so I'll do my best. Anyway, this category, the ones that are going to get planted on the last day of the average frost in the area where you live, is going to be beans, whether they're bush or pole beans, sunflowers, corn, and dill. There really isn't all that many. Maybe I'm forgetting some. I don't know, I'll have to add it if I am, but I think for the most part those are it. Just make sure that you, I use rubber band or different size jars and things like that. And if you want some tips on how to store your seeds, I did another video, you can check that out. But I put them all together and then I store them together so that when I'm ready to use them, they're all ready to go. So those are the last day of frost in the area. The second subcategory, the ones that you're going to direct seed, the cool weather crops that are done about 2 to 3 weeks before that date, is going to be beets, parsnips, turnips, carrots, radishes, and peas. These ones you basically never want to start indoors. Make sure that you plant them in the area where they're going to be planted outside. But at the same time, at this 2 to 3 week mark before you're planting outside, or excuse me, 2 to 3 weeks before the average last day of frost as you're planting outside, there are some others that you can add to this, but these fall into both categories in that you could start them early or you can direct seed them. So these would be lettuce, spinach, Pak Choi, mustard greens, endive, chard, collards, kale, arugula, and similar crops to that. Those all can be started at the same time directly outside. I use both methods actually. I both start some indoors and I plant them directly outside so that I can do some successive plantings. Basically that means you plant them at different times so that you're harvesting at different times rather than planting everything all at once and then you have all this stuff all at once. You plant a little here, a little here, a little here, that way you're harvesting here, here, and here, and it's all spread out and it's not so overwhelming and it gives you more of a chance to go through it all before any of it goes bad and whatnot. So the next category, there's 3 main categories for the ones that we're going to start indoors. So this is the earliest category. These are going to be started somewhere between 12 and 16 weeks before the average last day of frost. And I know but 12 and 16 is the difference of a month. Basically, if you have something that you can use to cover them, or if you live in an area where there's snow and things like that, you definitely want to make sure that the snow isn't going to be getting on them. So if you have like a cold frame or like those row covers and things like that to help protect them from frosts and things like that and help to warm the soil earlier in the year, then I would go with the 16 weeks ahead. If you're not able to cover them or offer them frost protection and things like that, then I would just go with this 12-week time frame. And so at that time, I start indoors the same list of crops, the seeds that I just gave you, that you can also direct seed outside. The lettuce, spinach, Pak Choi, mustard, endive, collards, chard, kale, and arugula, in addition to some others that have to be started inside. And this list includes onions, if they're being started from seed, celery, leeks, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, pansies, cabbages, and parsley. You can go either way. You can direct seed that outside or, start it inside, depending on when you want to harvest it, basically. But those are the ones that I start, and for various reasons, that second list I gave you, some of them get started earlier because they need a warmer temperature in order to germinate, and some of them get started earlier because they just take so long to get started in the first place, so that, you need to kind of get them started earlier so that you can even get a crop out of them before the weather starts getting warm in the year. So there's that first category, starting indoors, somewhere in between 12 and 16 weeks, depending on what you have available. The next category is going to be the 8 to 10 weeks, and this can depend on how much space you have. If you only have a little bit of space and you want to plant, in smaller pots, then I would go with the 8 weeks. If you have, maybe little bigger pots that you want to put them in the 9 or more space to work with, then I would go with the 10 weeks, and that's what I personally choose. So this category is going to be the warm weather crops that take a long time to get going. These are going to be tomatoes, peppers, petunias, eggplants, and some herbs, sage, lavender, oregano, and then 3 that are kind of optional, but I just do them at this time frame because it seems to make the most sense. I add marigolds, basil, and cilantro to that list. All of those either take a really long time to start growing, or they can take a really long time to germinate, and so getting a really good head start on them is actually pretty important. So that's the second category of starting indoors. And then the third category of starting them indoors is going to be mainly the vining crops. These you don't want to start too early because they can get a little bit too big if you do. So I would go with about 2 to 3 weeks ahead of time. And this is going to be cantaloupe, which is also known as muskmelon. And those definitely, I haven't really had much success planting those outside. They need a warm enough temperature, to germinate, and so I really think it's important to plant those inside. But the rest of them are actually optional. You can either plant them indoors or outdoors, but you can get a harvest out of them sooner if you plant them indoors. So that's what I do. But this is watermelon, pumpkin, zucchini, yellow squash, any types of winter squashes, meaning spaghetti, butternut, acorn, or cucumbers. So I hope that wasn't too confusing. Once you get all of the things separated into those mainly 5 categories, the 2 direct seeds, the earlier and the later, and then the 3 ones that we start indoors, the 12 to 16, the 8 to 10, and then the 2 to 3 weeks, then it makes it really easy once we figure out what the average last day of frost is in your area. That's the next step. Find out what that is, and then write that on your calendar. That's going to be the day that we sort of aim, depending on what the weather looks like, to do our planting of those warm weather crops and things like that. So then you would just count out and write on the calendar the days before it. So the week before that would be 1 week before the frost, 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks before the average last day of frost, and keep going 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so on until you get to where you're going to be starting. And then once you have all of your lists all together and your seeds sorted, now you can add it to your calendar to know what you're supposed to do. So if you know you're going to be starting your cold weather crops indoors at 12 weeks, you can write that, start cold weather crops indoors. Or when it comes to me 3 weeks before, you know you're going to be starting your direct seeds outside for the successive planting on those ones that we already started indoors. We're going to be starting a second batch, to keep getting a continual harvest there. And you're going to be planting those warm weather vining crops that are still too tender to be planted outside. You see what I'm saying? So now you know exactly what you're going to be doing ahead of time, and then as you're going through, and planning out what you're doing each weekend or whatever, whenever it works out for you, we can make sure that we're incorporating the time that we need to in order to get all the seeds started on time. So I hope all that made sense, and I hope that clarified more than confused you. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. But this is just how I do it and how I've able to stay on schedule of things, and I've definitely fallen into both pitfalls where I've accidentally gotten behind and and then things are, you know, not quite as far along as they should be by the time I plant them, or I've, you know, fallen into the other pitfall where I'm starting it too early and then I'm, you know, stressed out because things are getting too big before I need to, and that was years ago, and I definitely don't want to go there again. So that's why I put together this system, to help keep me on track so that I'm making sure I'm getting everything started on time. Well, anyway, I'm Frugal Green Girl. Thanks for watching.